fat bodies are filled with like so much pleasure. You're telling me people don't like fat people? Like, are you kidding me? All of me feels like a titty.
Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Alayna Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. Today's episode is one of my favorites yet. Have I been saying that every week? Lately? Yes. Am I excited about these conversations that I get to share with you? Yes. Today's guest is Alexandra Shewan. She is a counselor, a consultant, and fat liberationist who is deeply committed to the liberation of all bodies. She's also the founder of Selkie Counseling and Fat Tea, which is a monthly fat community meeting that she hosts. All information, as always, is linked in the description and show notes. Alexandra specializes in anti-oppressive, fat liberationist, and intersectional feminist counseling. And this conversation is one that I think everybody should listen to. The indoctrination of anti-fatness and fat liberation is so missing from so many of the conversations that we're having today around general liberation. Is so deeply ingrained in our society. It's insidious. It's not even questioned most of the time. And so today, Alexandra talks with us about fat liberation versus body positivity. We talk about fatness in healthcare, how fat liberation, queer rights activism, anti-racism, disability justice, how these things are all connected, colonialism. And we talk about the origins of fatphobia and the BMI and this medical model around what constitutes a quote-unquote normal or healthy body. It's a powerful conversation, and I hope that you enjoy. I'd love to hear a little bit about you in your own words. What brought you to the work that you do?
I came to counseling sort of as my, probably like third or fourth career, I would say, but very different from what I thought I would be doing with my life. My undergrad degree is actually in theater, and I did work professionally in theater for a couple of years until I burnt out like very hard, and realizing, thanks to the counselor I was working with as a client at the time, that there were programs out there that I could be accepted into. I sort of only had an idea of UVic, and that program is notoriously impossible to get into unless you have like a 4.0 psych degree. At least that's what I've heard. So learning from my then counselor, who I really adored working with, she was so encouraging and supportive and like, hey, like there could be something out there for you to do. You don't need to have a like rigorous clinical psych background. I had taken a couple psych courses in fourth year and loved them. And then I was like, well, fuck, I'm done now. And she told me about the program that she went to, which was sort of like a hybrid program, online and some in person, built for people who are at like a different stage of life. I was 28 when I started my program. And I went into that program knowing that I wanted to do, at the time, my language was probably more around body positivity. This is back in like 2018. I was like, just coming into like understanding more so like what fat liberation meant. And I think I had the ideas before I had the language for it. But I went into my counseling program knowing that's the kind of work that I want to do. I want to do feminist counseling. I want to do anti-oppressive counseling. And here we are.
I'm like thinking, is the theater kid to counselor pipeline a thing? Is that? Because same. I did a psych degree for my undergrad, but like I was a theater kid, high school, university, like hard.
Oh, cool.
And I'm wondering if there's something to like the interest in people, like an interest in the human experience.
I think that's a good point. But I was like, I want to actually work with people and feel the, I guess maybe impact more directly of actually getting to like sit with people and like to hear people's stories too, I think is a big part of it for me to witness people's stories, something that I've always loved. So yeah, I feel like it fits. The two actually fit quite well.
One of the pieces you mentioned in kind of coming into this chapter of your life was discovering the idea of body positivity, quote unquote, and the evolution of your practice and interest into fat liberation. Can you talk a little bit about what are the differences between those two things? What even is fat liberation?
It's a really good question. And I feel like they get conflated a lot. And also for people who are listening, but also you can only see me from the shoulders up. I am a visibly fat person. I am sort of mid to large fat on the spectrum of fatness. I like the term visibly fat to describe myself because I think it sort of references more how I experience access barriers out in my day-to-day life. There's a lot of considerations I need to take when existing in public, going to access medical care, doing pretty much anything in my life. So just to make sure people know that I'm speaking from that lens as a fat person. The difference between the two, sort of the short version, is that body positivity focuses on your feelings about yourself, and fat liberation focuses on oppressive systems that enact violence upon fat bodies and changing those systems. Whereas body positivity is more so about changing your thoughts, feelings, beliefs. There's a bit of overlap there. I mean, there's a good amount of overlap there, but yeah, fat lib is about making the world safer for fat people.
Right. So it's not saying that the two are mutually exclusive or that we're throwing body positivity out the window. You're saying that we need more. If I'm relating it to my own experience as, let's say, a queer person or a visibly queer person out in the world holding my girlfriend's hand, I can work on my own internalized homophobia till the cows come home. But if the systems that I'm working within aren't safe for me, at the end of the day, you can only go so far.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And body positivity is actually a branch of fat liberation. Fat liberation came first. Not many people know that there was actually a fat acceptance movement at the time of the civil rights movement and second wave feminism. Like there was fat rights activism happening in the 60s and 70s. I think it was 1967. There was a fat in New York where a bunch of, I think it was like 500 fat people gathered and like all like grouped together and like did a sit-in in a public space in New York City. And 1973, we see the Fat Liberation Manifesto being published and articulated. And it's, yeah, looking at that, it's like, oh, we have not made progress on any of the points in that manifesto. Maybe some, but the systemic stuff, very little. There's been a lot of posturing and a lot of sneaky ways that the like anti-fat medical industrial complex has co-opted language to make it seem like there has been more progress than there is. But at the end of the day, the goal of that system is to eradicate fat people. So yeah.
Can you say more about that, about the co-opting of language? And even for folks who are listening to this and have maybe never heard of like the medical industrial complex or like that, where that language might be new.
I mean, the medical industrial complex is looking at how our systems of healthcare operate in a broader sense with vested interest in maintaining the status quo, just like our systems of government, systems of policing, systems of military that were created under colonialism, under anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous racism, ableism, and all of these things. And fatness is so incredibly stigmatized in the medical field. It is viewed, I mean, more and more often. Now we're seeing fatness being talked about as like a disease state in the body, saying that to have a fat body, like someone would look at me and say that I have like a disease because my body is fat. They use the term obesity, which is increasingly considered a slur in the fat community because that word is directly tied to the BMI, the body mass index. And the origin of that word is from Greek words that actually mean having eaten oneself fat. So the actual meaning of that word, compounded with the fact that we only know about it and use it because of the BMI, which is an inherently anti-fat and anti-Black, racist, honestly eugenicist measurement that is fucking everywhere still.
And useless. Can we just say it? It's useless.
Yeah, it was literally created in 1860s, 1867 or something, by a Belgian statistician, not a medical doctor. And it's the time of sort of the scientific era for white European men were obsessed with this idea of finding the average man, or they called it l'homme moyen, right, in French in Belgium. And there was an obsession through science, I'm saying with heavily quotations, because it was just scientific racism is what it is. But at the time it was race science or whatever. But at the same time, we see the creation of the concept of race by white Europeans. Yeah, the BMI is effectively unchanged from the 1860s. The tool is nearly, it's the exact same equation. The categories have shifted over time, and it's only used in modern day because my nemesis, Ansel Keys, hate the guy, glad he's dead. He was, I think he died before I was even born, but I'm determined that.
Yeah, you're good riddance.
He's known for things such as the Minnesota starvation study, which was done post World War II, and it was to study the effects of starvation state in the human body, because famine, as it often is used as a tool of oppression or colonialism or supremacy, that was used through World War II. And so it was studied, and he ran this study starving a group of men basically for, I think it was 3 months, maybe. The caloric intake they were given is actually a bit more than the average diet nowadays. And it showed very long-term effects of this short period of a starvation effect in the body to increase thoughts, obsessive thoughts about food, consistently overeating when they did have access to food, really long-term effects of that. And Ansel Keys did this fucking study, and his takeaway was people eat too much, and we need to make sure people don't get fat.
What?
And then the rest of his career was grounded in anti-fatness. There's multiple records of him being overtly anti-fat. He's also the creator of the Mediterranean diet, so that can also get fucked forever. And yeah, he championed the use of the BMI. He was a huge advocate at political, governmental levels for the incorporation of the BMI in public policy. What was so convenient at that time is that insurance companies in the United States were oh, the BMI, this is great. We've been using all of these different waist circumference, neck circumference measurements. We've been using all these different tools to try and deny fat people care. Here is a super concise measurement. It's basic information that most people have, their height and their weight, and we can just run this number and use that to deny people health insurance. It's my little tinfoil hat moment. I have many of them here. But that's why we see the BMI being so prolific nowadays, is actively for denying fat people care to serve capitalism, bottom line of companies, and to overtly discriminate. Because it's also, the numbers were created based on exclusively male, white European data. So of course it's not relevant to anyone who doesn't fit that demographic of what the average body is. Also, the data was built on, they were soldiers. That's where you're going to have a giant data set. Quetelet, the Belgian statistician, he wasn't going to go around and collect all this data. He worked with a data set that was already available, which was military data. So white male European enlisted in the military.
Yeah. So for those listening who have ever maybe currently are looking at your own BMI and this is having an impact, what was just said here, right? These were numbers based on white men in the military, and that's it. And that's how they decided what is quote unquote normal, what is acceptable. It can be so eye-opening to recognize where these ideas, where this prejudice comes from, right? Like, it wasn't always this way. This is not some inherent right or wrong. There is no, like, the BMI is not a measure of health. Your weight, your body size is not a measure of health. Like, and it's one thing to say that and to hear it. It's another thing to understand, right? Like, where that belief system came from. So it is really important. And also, to step back for a second, you mentioned for yourself, you like the term visibly fat. You also said at one point, obesity moving closer and closer to being considered a slur. Can you talk us a bit through language and how language in your community is used for identity and identity versus adjective?
It's a tricky one around fatness too, because people's perception of themselves, and we're seeing, at least I'm seeing more and more, and it really frustrates the shit out of me. Non-fat people claiming fatness as an identity, not from a liberatory lens, but because they perceive themselves as fat and bad still. And like, it's really frustrating to see. So I use the term fat as a neutral descriptor, just like I would describe myself as white, as freckled, as wearing glasses, as tall. Not everyone who is fat is going to refer to themselves as fat. Lots of research has shown that fat identity is actually one that has the least amount of in-group bias. So in the research, in-group bias means a preference for, like, a positive bias towards a member of your identity group. And fatness does not have in-group bias. Anti-fatness is so deeply entrenched in our world that often fat people are not safe fat people to be around. And we can also recognize that that is because fat people are so deeply pressured to play the game of anti-fatness, to participate in fat talk and diet culture. And that also, to an extent, we have to do this to simply access medical care. So not everyone uses the word fat as their identifier. I don't know how I feel about the idea of like fat identity, because I kind of think like you are fat or you're not. Like, I don't know if it's about like identifying as fat. Like, for me, I use the word because it's an accurate descriptor of my body. And I've also done a lot of work to take the stigma and morality out of that word for myself and how I use it. I find the language on the spectrum of fatness is really helpful. So mid-large fat is where I am on the spectrum. I'd be happy to provide the link to include in the show notes if you want.
Yes, please.
But yeah, the spectrum of fatness gives you sort of an idea of like body size based on like clothing access, experiences out in the world, to give an idea of, yeah, where your body is located on that spectrum. We've seen the rise of this like identity of like mid-size more recently. That's also one I struggle with because I see so much anti-fatness in how that identity is talked about. And it's also the fact that if you're mid-size, you're still straight size. You still are not fat, and you can still walk into pretty much any clothing store. You can sit on the bus and not have people glare at you. You can fly on an airplane and not worry about getting kicked off the plane because someone doesn't want to sit next to you. You can go to any restaurant or event or venue and know that the seating there will fit your body. You're not at risk of breaking seating that is inaccessible to you. Not at no risk, but lower risk of going to the doctor and having your presenting issue actually dealt with instead of being told to lose weight. That one's not exclusive. Doctors are real fucking shitty. They are taught to be actively anti-fat in their programs. I have a friend who's a resident right now, who, bless, is queer and fat, and will be a doctor. And I'm so thrilled and I love them very much. But the higher your weight is, the more discrimination you're going to face always. And I feel like, too, this is where it's important to delineate between body positivity and fat liberation. Whereas, like, okay, for someone mid-size, maybe you do struggle to find clothes that maybe they fit your body, but they fit awkwardly. They're not patterned very well for your body, which is also like a huge issue in clothing excess for fat folks. Versus like super fat or infinifat person who could literally go in with like a life-threatening, immediate medical issue and not have it treated and be told that you have to get bariatric surgery before we will treat the illness or injury that you are experiencing. You know, clothing access, or, you know, your mom making shitty comments at the dinner table versus this hospital literally does not have a scale or an MRI machine that will fit my body, and I need to wait a significant amount of time longer. Or in a truly horrific cases that do happen, people at the highest end of the weight spectrum are sent to be weighed at zoos and grocery stores. Because hospitals don't have scales that can weigh the person.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that a human being, a person, that it would be considered acceptable under any conditions to treat somebody that way.
Yeah, it's the literal definition of dehumanizing.
I'm imagining the listener at home who is hearing all of this and going, yes, this is my experience. Like, first of all, thank you, Alexandra, for naming it. Maybe this person, maybe I've never heard somebody say these things out loud and recognize that these are discriminatory barriers that I face. And I also heard you say that you have not only neutralized the kind of morality, value, virtue idea behind anti-fatness for yourself. How do I do that? Where do I start when I live in this? I live within this system.
I mean, I am so passionate about this because I need it for myself. Like, I'm not going to pretend like it's only altruistic and for everyone. Like, of course, I'm self-motivated, and that's how I got into this work and, you know, this area of learning, because I want to live a safer, more dignified life. And I want all fat people to have that. So I think that's where some of the maybe urgency came from. And as I've gotten older, like, my body has gotten bigger too. I had a lot more body size privilege, even in my experiences of oppression as like a small fat through high school and university. And, you know, it's quite different for me now in my 30s. But really learning and understanding that anti-fatness is white supremacy. Anti-fatness is, I don't even want to say rooted in, because it just is anti-blackness. It's anti-Indigenous racism.
How?
It is...
For somebody who's listening and going, I think I agree with you, but how?
Great. Let's go back to the previous conversation we were having around the creation of the BMI and race science or scientific racism, creating racial categories. All of those ideas were created by white European, predominantly men, affluent, also important. And the period of time where these ideas were coalescing was during the time of the transatlantic slave trade. And so there was a vested interest from white, affluent Europeans to create racial categories to justify the violent exploitation of Black bodies. And their white supremacist fear that increased contact with Black people and Black bodies and violence enacted upon those bodies through sexualized violence and more and more mixed race people being born, there was this white supremacist fear that skin tone alone would no longer be an indicator of a person's status as human or not. Their whiteness would no longer be the immediate indicator that we can treat this person as a human, which is white supremacy dehumanizes anyone who is not white. And so all these other identities get created and added in to create sort of this division of who is or isn't human, who is or isn't moral, who is or isn't godly. And fatness gets tied to Blackness at this time in how this race science is being presented to justify the transatlantic slave trade, to justify white supremacy. And again, all of this is with air quotes. There's so much more to it, and I want to credit the teacher here, who is Sabrina Strings, her book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fatphobia.
That will also be linked. Description, show notes. Mind-blowing.
80% of what I have said today is from that book. She, I think, really threads the needle and looks at the historical record of how these ideas, proliferated. A really great companion to that as well is The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. Beautiful companion pieces to read together to learn about how, ideas around race were constructed, what was going on politically, like historically, in those times when those ideas were being created. This is like what keeps me so passionate about it, is I see working on anti-fatness as anti-racism work. It's integral to my anti-racism work. I have so much that I need to continue doing there as it relates to fatness, and also not. But doing this unlearning, it's anti-racism work. Like, it's necessary to do from that lens. And in modern day, we see racism operating covertly as anti-fatness in our systems.
Right.
The treatment rhetoric, diagnosis, fear-mongering around type 2 diabetes is so deeply tied to both these things, anti-fatness and anti-Blackness. Rates of diabetes are higher, generally speaking, in Black communities, in Latinx communities, in Indigenous communities. These are also communities who've been horrifically colonized and had unfathomable violence enacted upon their communities and their land and their ways of living. Type 2 diabetes is also very connected to allostatic load and like stress in the body. And what we see happening nowadays with the like urgency to like treat type 2 diabetes, I think really mirrors colonization. It's this idea that, okay, we need to go into this community. They don't know better. They don't know the right ways to eat. They don't know the right ways to move their body or think about food. We, the government system, need to go in and teach these people who don't know better. That's not to say that people don't need access to medical care and supports, but it needs to be offered in a non-stigmatizing way, and also needs to hold social determinants of health that, of course, we see rates of illnesses in communities who are violently oppressed to this day.
When you give those like comparative examples like that, it feels so clear and obvious. Like, now we look back at history, at least most of us, I hope, we look back at history and we go, whoa, colonization, real bad. Right? Like coming into a group of people, coming into a community, saying we know better than you, and we are now going to impose our structures, our beliefs, all of these things violently, destructively. We look back and we go, that was bad. We shouldn't do that anymore. And yet, as you just said, it's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, and colonization never ended.
No.
It is ongoing. It is still happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the point I always make is like, do we need to quote unquote teach people how to like eat right, which is how to eat white, Or like, do people need land back and reparations and equity and justice and safety and community and culture? But no, just monitor your sugar intake and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, wow. What next? What does somebody do to say, I want to start my journey of ridding myself of this internalized anti-fat rhetoric?
Well, there's a difference, right, between what's internalized and how you participate in systems and uphold anti-fatness. Also, you can only internalize oppression for an identity that you belong to. A thin person cannot have internalized anti-fatness. They have supremacist beliefs about themselves. That might also show up as a lot of self-hatred and self-consciousness, but it is tied to power and access and privilege. I truly see it as cult deprogramming. Anti-fatness and diet culture and white supremacist beauty standards run so deep. They are so reinforced at every turn that it really is a deprogramming from such a rigid set of beliefs, such rigid standards for belonging and safety and community and care. There's a lot of like heady work that is required of learning. A lot of reading. You got to read, you got to learn, you got to absorb these ideas, and you have to do just as much, if not more, exposure to those ideas as you have been indoctrinated with since birth. So it takes a lot, and it takes a long time, and it's a process, and you're going to start the journey, and you're going to have all these incredible realizations and feel these senses of freedom, and then you'll find some other uncomfortable thing that you need to dig up and work on, and then your body will change, and then you kind of need to do a lot of it over again. And it's, I would say, consistency, as in like all activism work, is really necessary. I have a whole list of books that I really love. I mean, I've already said Sabrina Strings. It's really essential. Reading, I would say, The Body is Not an Apology by Sonya Renee Taylor. Incredible updated second edition, came out within the last year or two.
I'll put the list in the show notes with some links and stuff.
And also on top of that, reading, yes, but get on the newsletter of both NAFA and ASDA. So NAFA is the National Association for the Advancement of Fat Acceptance, NAAFA, and then ASDA, the Association for Size Diversity and Health. They both have tons of resources. You can like sign petitions. They have organizing you can participate in. They're always looking for volunteers. ASDA has an incredible library of webinars and trainings available that you can access. And ASDA, they are the folks who own the Health at Every Size trademark. But those are great resources to turn to as well. And they've been doing that organizing work for decades. So it's important I do recommend a lot of social media accounts, but also that can't be all the learning. We need to go to the people who've been in the trenches for decades doing the work, and go to the literature too, I guess. Yeah.
In order to unlearn something or deprogram from something as ubiquitous as anti-fatness, you would need to consume and expose yourself to at least as much, if not more, of the other side of things in order to even begin that. I think that's just such it's realistic. It kind of I think that sets folks up for the work that is ahead. This show, we primarily talk about relationship. And I do want to ask you about how something like fat liberation or body positivity or body neutrality or whichever way you want to go, how can that show up in the dating world?
Or doesn't? I mean, it really depends. I feel like there's also such a clear delineation between the queer dating world and the hetero dating world. My queer clients who are not dating cis men, relationship-wise, far fewer issues. Not exclusively. There's still like a lot of anti-fatness in queer community. Incredible amount of like gender socialized pressure on like trans folks around body size. Like there's a lot of pressure that compounds in the queer community too. But I would say there is by and large more understanding and awareness and higher likelihood of a potential partner of any kind being more accepting or celebratory of fatness, I would say like different bodies, but it's like, I guess non-normative bodies, but like fat bodies are normal bodies. They're not different bodies. The language is so imperfect and like evolving around it. But the cis women dating cis men are in the fucking trenches, Alayna. They are in the trenches. It is. I shouldn't be laughing. Like, it's bad. It's hard.
Sometimes what can you do but laugh?
I will say the things that I like tend to see for folks, experiences I've had in my life too, like around dating and relationship, this really deep-seated belief that you have to lose weight to like widen your dating pool. I understand that people feel that way, but that like concept being proliferated grinds my fucking gears. Because why would you want to date someone who's not going to be interested in you if your fucking body changes? Fuck that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But there is this like deep-seated belief that you have to lose weight to get a man. It's just so tied together, I think, in like many cultures, not all, but like many cultures, that belief is really strong. For like fat cis women, well, I shouldn't say just cis, because there's definitely experiences in the trans community of this. Men willing to have sex with you or see you in private, but refusing to do so publicly. There's also like cis men just tend to be like afraid of fat women. I don't know how many experiences I've had in my life of just like having a conversation with a man and they get so panicked of like, oh, but like it's not flirting. Like I'm not attracted to you. Like it's like,
yeah.
We're talking just as friends. Like
no homo, like the equivalent, like the no homo of,
is what it is. Thank you for that. Yes, that's what it's like. Yeah. 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 No fatties.
Wow. Yeah.
And so often what I hear from people, and I actually think the TV show Shrill showed this really beautifully and fucking devastatingly in the second season, I think, is how, and I hear this from clients all the time, and it's so fucking heartbreaking on so many levels, of like finding men who they really have a connection with, like a friend, a coworker, and who they like have feelings for. And I've been in this position fucking countless times in my life. And it is obvious that there is an attraction and a connection there. And the man absolutely refuses and be like, whoa, no, like we're just friends this whole time. That's all that was going on. Like we're just buddies. We're just friends. It's like, you're lying to yourself, buddy. And in that way, like it's horrific for fat people, fat women to have that experience, but also like it sucks for those men too who feel like they can only be attracted to like one kind of body. And also like fat bodies are filled with like so much pleasure. Like they are so like pleasurable to like touch and like inhabit and interact with.
Like that's not talked about enough.
No.
Like, can we say that immediately?
Yeah, oh yeah. Fat bodies. Okay, it reminds me of this TikTok I saw. I wish I could remember who made it. It was maybe a year ago. It was this, I assume, woman. And she was like, you're telling me people don't like fat people? Like, are you kidding me? All of me feels like a titty.
I think I saw that.
It's so good.
I saw that.
My partner and I say that to each other all the time. It's like, yeah, all of me feels like a titty. Yeah, but you even think about like, babies love me. I definitely have like the definition of childbearing hips. Like I can pop one on there real comfortably. I've had many experiences in my life. You give me a baby, they're asleep on me very quickly. And I can remember too, like my mom has a larger body and has my whole life fluctuating. And I can remember being a kid and cuddling her and just feeling so like the softness and like the warmth and feeling so loved and comforted. And it's like, yeah, I feel like there is something inherently comforting about fat bodies. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that idea. I don't want to say it's just that. But if we're just like physiologically, the experience of like hugging a fat person, that it takes so much anti-fatness to just like have us believe this lie that like fatness is undesirable. It takes a lot of work from anti-fatness to make us believe that.
You mentioned your clients and how clients will come to you and share these experiences. What do you say to them? I don't know if I want to use the word advice, but like, what do you say?
I mean, in terms of people who are wanting to date men.
Yeah.
I tell them to never settle, to never compromise, especially for fat women. They're going to get that message no matter what. They've already deeply internalized that idea that you have to settle for whoever is attracted to you because you're so fat and so inherently undesirable is the narrative we internalize. He's not worth your fucking time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like, it's not worth it. And we know that in man and woman partnered relationships, men's quality of life and happiness increases and women's decreases. So how is it ethical for me as a counselor to support someone in like dating at what fucking cost? I'm like, build community, build different relationships with your friends and your found family. Find other ways to live your life and decenter men. Find other ways to experience pleasure like in your body or whatever it is that you're seeking companionship. A lot of people don't like that answer. Some people don't.
Oh, see, I'm like, I want steps, you know? I'm like, what can I write down in my notebook, take home, and like act upon? What are the actionable elements, you know, that I can, that we can share with the listeners?
Like, I think you really have to investigate what beliefs like about yourself and dating that you hold, what narratives about yourself you're holding there. I mean, like the quote unquote advice that I have isn't about like how to date more. It's about like live your life, find your people, find your community, do the things that make you happy, work on releasing that idea that like you need a man to do that.
Or a relationship, period.
Yeah, and if it happens, it happens. I guess one of the more actionable things for clients who are like actively like in the dating scene, it's a lot about how do you stay connected to yourself while you are dating? How do you stay connected to your sense of self, what you want, what feels good for you, what your body is telling you when you're interacting with this person? And I feel like that's in the service of like, yeah, don't fucking settle, don't compromise. Stay connected to yourself and what you know that you want.
And explore pleasure in your body, you mentioned. I can see that being an exercise also in tuning into what feels good, what feels right, what doesn't, what's setting off alarm bells, and even, you know, practicing listening to those signals even on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And like in pleasure in like a very broad sense, not just like a sexual sense too. We talk about pleasure all the time. It's, you know, trauma work isn't just the capacity for holding all of the intensity and overwhelm that we feel. It's also increasing our capacity to experience pleasure in our life. Like that is trauma healing work. Yeah, I I don't have dating advice. I just have like live your life and wait for someone who is worthy of you.
I think it's a great advice
Okay, thanks.
for dating or otherwise.
Yeah.
How can a quote unquote ally or a partner show active support for fat liberation?
I love this question because also I'm thinking about running a workshop that's like how to support your fat friends. So what can non-fat people do to support the fat people in their life? You need to learn about anti-fatness. You need to learn about how deeply seated that oppression is and try to learn on your own, just like how much the fat person in your life is up against. And if you can advocate for them in social settings, in medical settings, if you are inviting your fat friend out to a concert, dinner, whatever it is, you can put in that legwork to look into the accessibility of that space. It's going to vary from person to person, based on body size. But for me, I have to do a lot of research anytime I'm going to a restaurant or anywhere like with seating to figure out if I'm going to fit or not. So as a straight size person or non-fat supporter, you can put that legwork in. If the information isn't accessible, you can call the venue or the restaurant and, gently inquire or encourage them to have that information publicly available. You can attend doctor's appointments for the fat people that you love. Simply having the presence of a thin body there, the doctor will respect you more. And they'll probably hold their tongue a little bit more than they would with just the fat person in the room. Have conversations. Do all of this allyship consensually, right? And don't expect your fat loved one to trust you right away. Give them time, and you have to earn their trust on this because there's a good chance if you didn't have a lot of awareness around this topic that you've probably hurt your fat friend in ways that you had no idea you were hurting them. So give them time and do your learning and don't expect them to trust you right away and don't expect them to maybe thank you right away. But still do it because it matters and they will learn to trust you. I have thin people that I trust. Not most of them, but some. And, just as I'm sure people of all different identities feel that way about people who don't belong to the identity group. Celebrate the fat person in your life. People don't post their fat friends on their social media, and it fucking sucks to be the friend that no one takes pictures of. No one posts or celebrates or talks about. So celebrate the fat person in your life too.
Final question here before we jump over into the Patreon exclusive secret area, which you guys can check out. Link is in the description. So the show is about bringing kind of therapeutic insights to listeners. In your work today, what is one thing that you wish everybody knew?
I would say in specifically in the counseling world, as a client, your counselor works for you. You're allowed to ask them questions. You're allowed to ask them why they're taking a certain direction. You can ask them pretty much anything. It's for them to decide, how personal the question is. But you have a place in that relationship to ask things of your counselor. You don't have to just go along with what they think is best.
And that's actually what I want to get into in the Patreon in the extended version.
Cool.
Is the lens that you approach counseling with, what that actually looks like, especially for possibly someone who's maybe had a bad therapy experience in the past. But we'll save that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. In the lens of anti-fatness more specifically, there's two things I wish everyone knew. First one is that anti-fatness is anti-blackness. It's racism. And that the statistic that maybe if you're a bit familiar with anti-diet work that we see floating around, that it's always 90 something, 93 to 98, 95 to 98% of diets fail. I want people to know that statistic includes diet, so changes to food and movement. It also includes bariatric surgery, and weight loss medications.
Oh.
That is something I
did not know.
I feel like people do not know.
No.
Specifically around bariatric surgery, that failure rate includes bariatric surgery. They're just like the pattern we see with diets. There's usually the short-term decrease in weight, and then there's usually plateau, and then increase to regain more than where the person initially started. And that also happens in bariatric surgery, at the very least, plateau. And weight loss medications, I mean, there's this... I can't even... Like, what words do I even have for GLP-1s? There's... It's just exhausting as a fat person. But just for everyone to know, even like Ozempic, this like fucking miracle that's gonna eradicate fat people, which... Hi, if you think that's a good thing, that's eugenics, like, just so you know.
Yeah.
In their own fucking research, which was only 2 years, weights were trending up again at the end, while still on the medication, which you have to be on for your entire fucking life to keep the weight off, theoretically.
It's just so much of what you're saying and so much of what you've shared in this episode. One, it's shocking that this still feels, like you said at the beginning, like we've made little to no progress in 50 years. So it's shocking that this still feels like a fight that we're like just getting started. This has been something to be fought against for a very long time. And it's shocking that how little progress we've made. And also the parallels, right, between other sort of social justice movements, whether it's anti-racism or homophobia, transphobia. For anybody listening who these might be new concepts, just transplant anything we've talked about into any one of these other communities, right? Like a lot of the folks that listen to this show are queer. Mm-hmm. And if we think about queerness used to be considered a disease, right? Queerness used to be considered, well, we need to, missionaries or whoever, we need to go into these communities and teach them the right way because they don't know better. Queerness used to be something that we thought we could cure through various therapies, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's ridiculous. When you think about it, it feels ridiculous. The point I'm trying to make is like the really watered down kind of like vanilla messaging that applies broadly is like somebody else living their life doesn't impact you, right? Like let queer people be queer people, let whatever, it doesn't impact you. If we want to use that same broad sort of messaging, it's parallel, it applies, like this determination to eradicate fatness. All it is eugenics, like that's what it is. It's trying to make people one way, and that one way is in alignment with this European colonizer, white supremacist.
Able-bodied,
exactly. And it's like we're in the process of doing away with so many of those other pieces. It's time for fatness, for body size, body shape. It's time for that to catch up, right?
Yeah, agreed.
So thank you so much, basically. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise here and taking the time.
Thank you for your questions, your curiosity, understanding, support. Yeah, and I really appreciate you drawing those parallels too, because I mean all oppression is intertwined. It's all in service of white supremacy and colonization.
So where can people find you before we go? Is there any projects you're working on, anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. So at Selkie Counseling, Selkie, like the mythological seal people. There's a sign up to my newsletter through there if you want to stay in the know. And for any fat folks listening, I co-facilitate a monthly fat community meetup. It's free. Anyone fat can show up. You can participate as much or as little as you want. There's some folks where it's maybe newer work and it feels really scary. As long as you come and say hi, either vocally or on camera, we just need to get like an ID on you to make sure you are who you say you are. But you're welcome to just hang out, camera off, mic off, and just listen the whole time if that's what feels safest. And we also started up in the summer with a wonderful facilitator, Athena, a BIPOC affinity group. So it's called the Fat T. So there's like the general meetings, and then there's the BIPOC Fat T group. The Fat T is us.
Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/AlaynaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at sleepingaroundpod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Alayna Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Corey Mosqueda. See you next time, back here on the couch.